In the heart of a small, sleepy town stood a market that seemed to have been forgotten by time. The place was known as the Shadow Market by locals due to its enigmatic atmosphere and the sinister stories that surrounded it. During the day, it was a place where local vendors gathered to sell fresh produce, antiques, and other quirky items. Lazy conversations unfolded under the hot sun, and children ran through the cobblestone alleys. But as the sun set and the shadows lengthened, the Shadow Market took on a gloomy atmosphere that was hard to ignore. There were as many stories about the market as there were products on sale. The most famous of them told the legend of a sorceress who had lived in the city centuries ago. She had been disowned by the community due to her dark practices, and, on her deathbed, she had placed a curse on the place. Legend stated that the sorceress promised to return to take revenge on the city that had banished her. The bravest said that, at night, it was possible to hear ghostly whispers in the dark corners of the market, as if the condemned sorceress were still present. Local traders, although reluctant to talk about it, often shared stories of objects that mysteriously disappeared during the night, only to be found again in the unlikeliest of places. Despite the horror stories, the Shadow Market was a popular spot with tourists, attracting curious onlookers from far and wide looking for an authentic experience, and perhaps a glimpse of the supernatural. For Alex, Sarah, and Jake, three friends who loved challenges and scary stories, the market offered the perfect opportunity to spend a night full of adventure. That afternoon, the sun shone over the market, and the friends were full of enthusiasm. Alex, the leader of the group, had the idea of spending the night at the market, proving that there was nothing to fear in the old horror stories. Megan, his girlfriend, was more skeptical, but decided to join the adventure. Jake, on the other hand, was the staunch skeptic, determined to debunk local superstitions. The group set up their stalls in the market's central square, where fruit and vegetable stalls had given way to street vendors selling trinkets and antiques. They lit a fire and laughed at local superstitions, mocking ghost stories and the supposed witch's curse. Sarah, a lover of the occult and an avid reader of horror stories, was especially intrigued by the location. She had researched the legend of the witch and was curious to see if there was any evidence of the supernatural on the market. As he explored the narrow alleys, he noticed strange inscriptions on the stone walls of the buildings, symbols he couldn't decipher. She showed the inscriptions to her friends, but Jake dismissed them as mere old decorations, while Megan agreed that the town was full of legends. As the night progressed and the sun set, the atmosphere in the market began to change. The lights from friends' flashlights were the only sources of illumination, and shadows stretched everywhere. The market, which during the day seemed like a lively and picturesque place, now seemed silent and desolate. The group laughed at the horror stories and lit more fires, trying to dispel the growing sense of unrest that surrounded them. They shared scary stories, braving the unknown and trying to keep their spirits high. However, as the night progressed, the atmosphere in the market became increasingly sinister, and the fun began to fade as fear took over. As night fell over the Shadow Market, the stars above were obscured by dark clouds that cast a dense darkness over the place. Their friends' flashlights were their only defenses against the shadows that seemed to move uneasily between the abandoned stalls. Sarah, the lover of the occult, began to feel a sinister presence around her. She was sure something was wrong. The writings on the walls seemed to come to life in the light of the lanterns, giving off a disturbing aura. With every step they took, the feeling that someone or something was watching them intensified. She shared her suspicions with her friends, but Jake was no longer so sure it was all just ghost stories. He tried to maintain a skeptical attitude, insisting that the human mind was capable of creating terrifying illusions when faced with the unknown. Megan, however, was restless. She noticed movements in the shadows that she couldn't explain. A glimpse of something that seemed to be hiding among the antique stalls, watching them with glowing eyes, sent her into a panic. But when he tried to point to what he saw, there was nothing but shadows. The friends continued to laugh at the horror stories, but now it was clear that fear had crept into their hearts. They knew they were in an unusual situation, but they still believed they could handle anything the market had in store for them. As they laughed, a freezing wind cut through the night, extinguishing the fire instantly. The flames that were once crackling with life were extinguished, as if someone had blown hard. Darkness closed in on them, and the feeling that they were not alone in the market enveloped them. Megan grabbed Alex's arm, her eyes wide with terror. Whatever it was now in complete darkness and seemed to be moving around them. The friends looked at each other, their faces pale and their hearts racing. Suddenly, a soft murmur, like an unsettling whisper that seemed to come from all directions, broke the silence of the night. The friends cowered, watching the shadows that danced around them. Fear was turning into terror as the murmur persisted, as if the shadows had a life of their own and were trying to communicate with them. Jake, who used to be the skeptic of the group, broke out in a cold sweat. He tried to remain calm, but the oppressive presence in the market was becoming unbearable. Each dark whisper seemed to penetrate his mind, awakening an ancient fear he didn't know he possessed. Sarah, although intrigued by the supernatural, was beginning to feel that they had underestimated the market. The mysterious writings on the walls seemed to come to life, and the whispering seemed to be invading his thoughts. She began to wonder if perhaps the shadow market was more than just a collection of scary stories. Megan was on the verge of panic, her hands shaking as she held the flashlight. Her eyes were fixed on the moving shadows, and she whispered words of protection that she had read in horror stories. The fear was palpable, and the atmosphere was thicker than ever. And then, darkness closed over them like an ominous cloak. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the ominous murmur reached a growing foreboding. Jake suggested that perhaps it was time to leave the market and return to the safety of their homes. But before they could move, something inhuman echoed through the night. "You have invaded my domain," the voice whispered, sending shivers down her spine. "Now you belong to me." The ominous voice echoed through the market, and the friends turned around in panic, desperately searching for the source of the words. The shadowy figure that emerged from the shadows was even more terrifying than they could imagine. Clad in a black cloak, the entity slowly advanced towards them, its steps seeming to defy the laws of physics, as if it were floating above the stone floor. The figure's face was hidden by the shadows of the hood, but the eyes that glowed beneath were like two shadowy fires that seemed to suck the light from his friends' lanterns. Jake, Megan, and Sarah cowered at the presence of the entity, their hearts hammering in their chests. Silence dominated the market as the shadowy figure approached. His eyes seemed to hypnotize his friends, making them feel like they were trapped in a nightmare. None of them could even utter a word, terror paralyzing them. The figure didn't say a word, but its presence was threatening. His bright eyes roamed the group as if reading their souls, and the weight of his gaze was almost unbearable. Shadows seemed to dance around him, as if darkness were his ally. Sarah, driven by her curiosity and knowledge of the occult, tried to break the silence and communicate with the entity. "Who are you?" she asked in a shaky voice. "Why did you choose us?" The shadowy figure did not respond verbally, but his presence intensified. The unsettling whispers seemed to coalesce into an ominous chorus, filling the market with a disturbing cacophony. Jake tried to step back, but his legs wouldn't respond. He was spellbound, unable to move. The shadowy figure then let out a piercing scream that echoed through the deserted market, hitting his friends like a blow of terror. The screams echoed in their ears, making them scream in agony. The voice was like a sharp dagger, piercing their souls and leaving an indelible mark of fear. The entity reached a skeletal hand towards them, its slender fingers twitching as if it wanted to grasp their souls. Jake, in an act of desperation, grabbed a piece of wood from the unlit fire and lit it in hopes of warding off the entity. He brandished the makeshift torch toward the shadowy figure. The torchlight illuminated the entity's face, revealing a pale, cadaverous countenance. But to the surprise of his friends, the figure did not retreat in front of the light, as they expected. On the contrary, his bright eyes seemed to intensify, shining with a dark fury. The figure let out another piercing scream, a scream that seemed to echo centuries of hatred and bitterness. The sound was almost deafening, and the friends felt as if they were on the verge of madness. The terror they experienced was like a nightmare from which they could not wake up. And then, as if in response to some invisible command, the shadows surrounding the figure began to writhe and come together, forming a dark mass that enveloped the entity. The friends watched in horror as the figure transformed into a whirlwind of shadows, as if being swallowed by the abyss itself. The creature dissipated into the darkness, leaving behind only an eerie echo of its words and the feeling that something terrible had happened. The friends remained motionless, watching the darkness where the figure had been moments before. The market was quieter than ever, the ominous entity's presence now just a terrifying memory. The silence that followed the encounter with the entity was almost unbearable. The friends shared nervous glances, still in shock from what they had faced. Fear still clung to them, like a ghost that refused to disappear. Whatever the shadowy figure was, they had survived their encounter with the supernatural. But the questions remained unanswered. Who was the entity? Why did you choose them? And what did the sinister figure want from them? The only certainty was that the shadow market was not just a collection of horror stories and superstitions. It was a place where the inexplicable could manifest, where fear was more than an illusion. With the market shrouded in silence, the friends finally found the strength to retreat, slowly moving away from that cursed place towards the safety of the city. The friends walked away from the oppressive darkness of the shadow market, their hearts hammering in their chests. The shadowy figure they had faced still haunted their thoughts, its ominous presence etched into their minds like an indelible scar. They ran through the dark streets of the city, the light of flashlights illuminating the way in their desperate escape. The sense of relief at leaving the terrifying market behind was almost palpable. The cool night air, once so choked with fear, now filled his lungs with a feeling of freedom. They looked at each other, still in shock from what they had experienced, but grateful to be alive and together. Megan, still shaking, grabbed Alex's arm, as if afraid that the darkness they had left behind might spread to them. Her eyes were wide, and her voice was shaking when she finally managed to speak. What? What was that? Jake, who used to be the skeptic of the group, didn't have a rational answer to give. He felt helpless, his convictions shaken by his encounter with the supernatural. I don't know, he admitted in a shaky voice. I've never seen anything like it. It looked like it was made of darkness. Sarah, whose interest in the occult had drawn her to that terrifying night, was deeply disturbed. She knew she couldn't explain the entity they had faced with her theories and knowledge. She was still searching for answers, and knew that this experience would change the way she viewed the world of the supernatural. As they continued to walk away from the market, the heavy silence was broken only by the disturbing whispers that echoed in their minds. The dark figure's ominous words still resonated in their ears, making them shudder. The entity had threatened them, declaring that they now belonged to them, and that threat hung over them like a shadow. They finally reached the safety of their homes, where light and warmth welcomed them. Megan and Alex hugged each other tightly, seeking comfort in each other's presence. Jake retreated into his corner, deep in thought about what they had faced. Sarah, in turn, began desperately searching books and the internet for supernatural entities similar to the one they had encountered. They shared the terrifying experience with their families and friends, but few could understand the magnitude of what they had experienced. The stories they told sounded like horror stories, and many attributed the events to their friends' overactive imaginations. As time passed, the group remained united by the experience they shared. The memory of the shadowy figure in the terrifying night in the shadow market would stay with them for the rest of their lives. They knew that the world was full of mysteries and inexplicable dangers that lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right opportunity to manifest themselves. The story of the haunted market spread throughout the city, reinforcing the legends and horror stories. The shadow market has become a place avoided by locals at night, and the mysterious writings on the walls have taken on a dark new meaning. The friends, in turn, learned that sometimes it's best to respect superstitions and avoid challenging the dark forces that may lurk in the shadows of the night. They faced terror in the market, but their haunting memories would stay with them for the rest of their lives, reminding them that the unexplainable is an inescapable part of the world, even in small, sleepy towns.